All right. Hi, thanks for joining me, Alexis Kochanski. It's great having you here. And I think the best place to start is by having you give our readers and listeners an overview of your career up until now.
Well, thank you, Kelly, for taking the time to have me here. So, my name is Alexis Kochanski. I am the Director of Member Engagement with Medical Alley Association. And a little bit about me. So, I am traditionally from Minnesota, born and raised here. Grew up on the east side of the Twin Cities area, so in kind of the Woodbury, Maplewood area. Went to the University of Minnesota for 4 years. I was a gymnast there from 2006 to 2010. Go Gophers. Graduated with a political science degree, moved out to Washington, D.C., thought I'd live there forever, and I actually found out I missed home. So while I was out there, I worked for another association, but it dealt with environmental issues, particularly forestry. And this was kind of around the time that the Affordable Care Act had passed, and I got really immersed in the healthcare policy. So I decided, let's go back home to Minnesota. I got back into the University of Minnesota, graduated from the School of Public Health with an emphasis in policy and administration through their PHAP program. And I spent about 5 years working in state government. So I did legislative affairs roles at the Department of Labor and Industry and then also the Department of Human Services. And I decided I needed a little bit of private sector experience. So I headed over to Medical Alley, and a lot of the work that I'm doing is engaging with members and learning more about our innovative ecosystem. So
Yeah, well, I mean, the reason we're meeting today is to talk about diversity and inclusion efforts. So, what work is being done in that area in the medical alley?
Oh, for sure. So, if we had to level set here, so Medical Alley really is the global epicenter of health innovation and care. And I really emphasize that because part of the work that our association does is to really elevate this region. So, we want folks thinking about Medical Alley the same way they think about Silicon Valley, the same way they think about the tech innovation happening over there in California. We want them to be thinking about all of the health innovation happening here in Minnesota's Medical Alley. So that's just the first part. But in particular to DE&I, when we think about this issue, this isn't necessarily new, like a brand new issue for our Medical Alley community. These are efforts that they've been working on for a long period of time. But of course, with the killing of George Floyd and the increased emphasis on racial injustice happening in the US, I think that a lot of our member companies are re-looking at how they have approached DE&I, how they think about health equity. So we're seeing a lot of energy on this issue. A lot of our member companies are thinking about the ways that they're looking at talent coming into their companies. I think they're thinking about a lot of their inclusivity policies around what their current workforce looks like, developmental opportunities, what their leadership teams look like, and really pushing themselves to think more in depth about DE&I as a whole. And the last thing I'll say too, what I'm hearing from member companies is, this importance around ensuring that our future workforce is there, and understanding how the diverse backgrounds really contribute to a better future for healthcare.
Mhm. That's great. So, in your work, what are the successful companies doing to, expand their DE&I efforts?
Yeah. So I think it varies. So, Medical Alley, we're a member company, or a member association with over 600 members. So we're going to range from some of the largest organizations to our early stage startups, right? Our even small organizations, mid-sized organizations. So I will say on the journey of DE&I, what's been so fascinating and encouraging is that we really do get a chance to engage with companies that are along the entire spectrum of the work that's happening on this issue. So, for example, for some of our larger organizations, they're really looking at the way that they track data, right? So, how are we measuring progress on DE&I? We've seen some really innovative dashboards that really highlight kind of the growth in that space. For some of our startup companies and some of our smaller companies, they're really looking at building out their DE&I programs for the first time. So really learning from some of the other organizations, putting things in place that work well. A lot of unconscious bias training I've been hearing a lot about, a lot of emphasis around the ERG groups and really elevating them and understanding what their needs are, what the organization can be doing better. And then we just have some organizations also that really look at DEI DE&I as a way to really revisit their mission and their vision, and how can we embed DE&I into that. So not having DE&I be this thing we put on a shelf and we pick from it when we choose, but really looking at how can we incorporate this in the way that our organization just approaches our mission, how we serve our customers, and things like that.
Yeah, I attended one of your workshops a few weeks ago, was that virtual webinar on DE&I efforts in the medical space. And that was something that I think a lot of companies said, was that it's a part of everything that they do. They always look at it through that lens. So I think that's a really interesting point. I don't know if you can give me specifics here, but I'd love to hear an example of a large company or a small company that is doing successful DE&I efforts. What does that look like for them?
Oh, for sure. So one of the things I want to highlight, we do one of the great projects that we're doing right now, and we launched it in April, and our team is so excited about it, is we launched a diversity, equity, and inclusion webpage on our medicalalley.org website. And so this really is centered around amplifying the work that our member companies are doing internally at their organizations and also externally. So I just want to plug that a little bit. That's a great place to go for even more stories. But for some of the ones that spoke to me, and I'm going to also say there's a lot that spoke to me, but I have two that come to mind. The first is a program that Abbott is involved in, and this is an internship program that is focused on women getting engaged in STEM, which has been very, very impressive. And really what it looks at is it looks at partnering with high schools. So it's a high school internship program, and really just creating these pathways and internships to get more young women engaged in STEM. And so what's been most interesting about that as well is they've developed a blueprint, and this blueprint is scalable. And I think that that's what's really important about DE&I. I think some folks that are just getting into it can feel at times overwhelmed by the desire to want to do more, but like, how do you get started? How can we make some headway? So I really, really, really love this blueprint because it's scalable. It's scalable to getting a lot of high school interns to maybe just getting one, if that's all that your company can achieve. So that's one area that has been great. And it was fun to have a conversation with someone at Abbott, because they actually had their first, so they had a high school student that came on board through their program. She was also a college student, and then hired her into being an employee of Abbott. So like the whole pathway through. So I thought that that was really awesome. So that one really spoke to me. And another thing I want to talk about too is there's another organization called Innovize, and they spoke to some of the work that they're doing with their workforce. And they have a high population of Hmong employees, and providing ESL opportunities for those employees as a development portion of the work they're doing for their company. And what I loved about that example, and as it relates to DE&I, is really looking at your workforce and listening to them and understanding what would be beneficial in terms of their development and that investment that they will in return have in the organization. So those are just two that really spoke to me. There are a lot more. I could go into more detail, but I'm going to stick with those two for now.
Okay, just for podcast sake, we'll stick to those two. So, how do we hold companies accountable for having successful DE&I efforts?
Yeah, I think that this is a really good question. And I think, accountability is important, but I also think, when you think about DE&I, and one of the things when I talk to other DE&I leaders, it really is that buy-in from, senior leadership to really ensure sustainability. And I think that continued engagement with your workforce, and I think providing opportunities for employees to build trust with their organizations so they can hold their leaders accountable, right? So if you're in an organization that has, we talk a little bit about DE&I, we talk about talent and pipelines going into companies, but I also think, diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? Emphasis on inclusion. So DE&I initiatives aren't going to be very positive if you have new folks coming in, but we can't retain folks. So as we think about the inclusion piece, that aligns with accountability. So when you create spaces for diverse employees that have diverse backgrounds, diverse experiences, to feel safe at work, to share their experiences and what would be valuable to them, I think it helps with accountability. But I do think that there needs to be a level of investment and buy-in from senior leadership really in these DE&I initiatives to ensure their sustainability.
Yeah, to follow up on that, what do the conversations with those leaders look like then, when you're approaching them with the importance of a DE&I initiative or an expansion in a company?
Yeah. I want to pull on maybe a recent conversation that I had with a member company.
Mhm.
And what they talked about is, really taking these ERG groups. So a lot of organizations have ERG groups, but who are they reporting into? Who are they connected to? How engaged is the CEO? Right. I even think just creating that pathway into a CEO that they have visibility in and some buy-in into these groups, I think it empowers them to continue to talk about their work. But what she shared with me was this concept around, we had an in-depth listening session with one of our ERG groups, and we just asked them, what can we do more as an organization to make this more of an inclusive place? And they gave them a list of, 5 things. I'll highlight just 2 of them. There were, it was a good discussion, but one of them was, we want to see the organization more engaged in the community. We want to see us more out front. So, following up with ways that they could list out some organizations that would meet that need. And then another area was related to, investment and development and their growth, right? So that piece was, you know, if we're really hoping to stay here and grow in the company, we want to take on more leadership positions, but we're applying and maybe we're not getting it, or there may be some disconnect. Can we have some coaching? Can we have some mentoring, some investment that really shows the investment that they have in their talent in their company? And that would be beneficial to them. And this company listened, and they're making steps to make that happen. So that's just an example, a recent one that I had.
Yeah, that's something. So that kind of jumps on something you said. It sounds like a lot of companies are now pivoting to look externally to build their pipelines and do DE&I efforts in the community. I'm curious, is that a recent change in terms of DE&I efforts? Is that new in this area or has that been around for a while? It's just something that I've kind of personally picked up on.
Yeah, it's hard for me to say, and I don't want to have a conclusive answer that,
Mhm.
says it's all been one way. But what I do want to capitalize on in this conversation is the positive energy around really understanding, community and the impact that it has on organizations and the impact that it has on employees within your organization, right? I think that that's what's really huge. And I think, the George Floyd murder
Mhm.
was in our backyard, right? It was in Medical Alley. And I think the impact that it not only had nationally and internationally, but just in this community here in Minnesota was so strong. And I think it's caused companies, and I don't want to say that companies haven't been involved in the community, because they most definitely have. But I think a lot of companies have stopped to reassess and say, hold on, okay, so what are we doing? Okay, this is what we're doing. Is it enough? Or where do we want to go? And what do we want to be seen as? And what is the impact that we could have on not only DE&I, but also health equity, right? These concepts around health equity and social injustice and these issues, I think it's really provided a new energy around it. And we're seeing a lot of engagement from member companies in that space.
Awesome. Yeah, I wanted to ask about health equity and work that's gone into that. So what does that look like and how does DE&I efforts relate to that?
Oh, absolutely. So this is a fun one. So,
Yeah.
our team, we're excited to, I indicated earlier on, we launched a webpage on DE&I. DE&I and health equity go hand in hand, but we wanted to be intentional about, they're not the same thing, right? So DE&I in its space, they relate very closely, but they're not the same thing. And we wanted to ensure that as we dive into health equity, disparities, all of that work, we are putting the emphasis around it that it truly deserves. And so that will be coming. We're going to be excited to move more into that space. But I think when we think about health equity, I think it's so important, and it's such a multi-layered and deep issue. And
Mhm.
there's a lot of pieces that go into the health of a person. And so when we think about health equity, and Medical Alley is focused on the future of healthcare. How do we power the future of healthcare? How do we deal with some of the most challenging issues in healthcare? So as we think about, health equity, we really want to be mindful about all the different components that make health equitable for all. And so I think it floats into DE&I spaces, because if you could take one piece of health equity, opportunity, right? So if you think about, you're an organization that could be looking at creating more opportunities for more diverse populations, or people from underserved communities, that could overall contribute to the better health that they'll have within for themselves and also their families and generations to come. So I think that that's the connection between DE and I.
Yeah. Yeah. And so then to take that and apply another layer to it is how does Medical Alley then play into that?
Yeah, I think Medical Alley, as an association, what we really serve to do is to really provide a platform that drives more attention to and energy behind our work that our member companies are doing. So we do that through, elevating their work, getting more eyes on it, sharing what they're doing, and also providing opportunities for companies to collaborate with each other so that as a collective we can do more in this space. And I think that that's really the role that Medical Alley continues to serve. I mean, we're here to serve our over 600 member companies, but this is an important area, and our member companies are energized and fired up about this issue. And so we really see ourselves as a platform and a venue to once again amplify, but then also provide a platform for true collaboration to innovate.
Awesome. Well, I want to talk about outcomes here. So, looking ahead, if you can kind of look into your glass orb here, 5 years down the road, where do you want Medical Alley to be in terms of their DE&I efforts?
Oh, yeah, that's a really good question.
Yeah.
You know, what I'd like to see, from Medical Alley, from this space, is I would like to see um, us serving as more of a continued platform to bring these leaders together so that they can bounce ideas off of each other, information share. As we think about Medical Alley, I think we have some of the best talent, or we do have the best talent in this space in the nation. I think in the
Mhm.
world. I may be a little biased, but I think it's a great place to be.
Yes.
Um, and so I think there's a lot of really good information sharing and best practices that our companies could work with each other on. We want to build those connections up. So I'd love to see more and more connections. I'd love for us to have more content out there, more resource sharing, more webinars that push folks to think more in depth about these topics, and not just these topics, but also the role that technology plays in them and health innovation. I think that that's what's going to be really critical and really important. So for example, recently we had a webinar on maternal health disparities. And so, more in that work where we're bringing those critical topics to the forefront on our platform, but then also talking about the role that technology plays. So, more webinars in that space. I'd love for us to play a stronger role in the diverse pipelines of talent, the investment in some of the diversity as we think about the future of talent. I'd love to see more of the work in that space on DE&I.
Awesome. Great. Well, I think that was everything that I was going to ask about. So, is there anything else you wanted to add in or emphasize?
You know, not as much, but I do want to highlight the fact that this is a great opportunity to be able to talk about the good work that Medical Alley Association not only does, but really the true work that our member companies do. DE&I is an important issue. It is great to have the opportunity to talk more about it, and I'm really excited to see where it goes. So I really appreciate your time today, Kelly.
Yeah, and thanks for your time. And last thing, what's the website where people can go get resources for your resources?
Oh, okay. So the place that you can go check out a lot of our DE&I work from our member companies is medicalalley.org/DEI.
Easy enough.
Easy enough.
People should remember that.